Chapter 14. Soon the whole empire was in an upheaval. The administration was paralyzed, troop movements were reported, and people spoke of civil war. It was said that Nizam had distributed arms in certain districts of Isfahan. In the bazaar, the merchandise had been stored away. The gates of the principal souks, notably that of the jewelers, were closed at the beginning of the afternoon. In the neighborhood of the Diwan, the tension was at its greatest. The Grand Vizier had had to hand over his offices to Hassan, but his residence adjoined them, and only a small garden separated him from what had become the territory of his rival. Now the garden had been transformed into a veritable barracks, and Nizam's personal guard patrolled it nervously, armed to the teeth. No one was more embarrassed than Umar. He wanted to intervene, to calm spirits down, and to find a way for the two adversaries to compromise. Even though Nizam continued to receive him, he missed no occasion to reproach him for the poisoned gift which he had made him. Hassan, on the other hand, spent his time locked up with his papers, busy preparing the report which he had to present to the Sultan. Only at night did he allow himself to stretch out on the large carpet of the Diwan, surrounded by a handful of his trusty men. 3 days before the fateful day, Khayyam still wanted to attempt a final mediation. He went to Hassan's apartments and insisted upon seeing him, but he was asked to come back 1 hour later, as the Sahib Khabar was holding a meeting with the treasurers. Umar decided that he would take a few steps outside and had just passed through the doorway when one of the royal eunuchs, dressed all in red, addressed him. "If Khawaja Umar would be so kind as to follow me, he's expected." After the man led him through a labyrinth of tunnels and staircases, Khayyam found himself in a garden of whose existence he had had no suspicion. Peacocks strutted around free, apricot trees were in blossom, and a fountain murmured. Behind the fountain they came to a low door encrusted with mother of pearl. The eunuch opened it and invited Umar to proceed. It was a vast room with the brocade-lined walls, and at one end it had a sort of vaulted niche protected by a curtain, which fluttered, indicating someone's presence behind it. Khayyam had hardly entered before the door was shut with a muffled sound. Another minute of waiting and confusion ensued before a woman's voice was heard. He did not recognize it, but he thought he could identify a certain Turkish dialect. However, the voice was low and the speech was rapid, with only a few words emerging like rocks in a flood. The gist of the discourse escaped him, and he wanted to interrupt her and ask her to speak in Persian or Arabic, or just more slowly, but it was not so easy to address a woman through a curtain. Suddenly, another voice took over. "My mistress, Terkan Khatun, the wife of the Sultan, thanks you for having come to this meeting." This time the language was Persian, and the voice was one that Khayyam would recognize in a bazaar on the Day of Judgment. He was going to shout, but this shout quickly turned into a happy but plaintive murmur. "Jahan." She pulled aside the edge of the curtain, raised her veil, and smiled, but with a gesture prevented him from drawing close to her. "The Sultana," she said, "is worried about the struggle unfolding within the Diwan. Disquiet is spreading and blood is going to be spilled. The Sultan himself is very concerned about this and has become irritable. The harem resounds with his bursts of anger. This situation cannot last. The Sultana knows that you are attempting to do the impossible and reconcile the two protagonists, and she desires to see you succeed, but such success seems distant." Khayyam concurred with a resigned nod of his head. Jahan continued, "Things having come so far, Terkan Khatun considers that it would be preferable to dismiss the two adversaries and to confer the vizierate upon a decent man who can calm spirits down. Her spouse, our master, is surrounded according to her, with schemers, but he just needs a wise man who is devoid of base ambition, a man of sound judgment and excellent counsel. As the Sultan holds you in high esteem, she would like to suggest to him that he name you Grand Vizier. Your nomination would relieve the whole court. Nevertheless, before putting forward such a suggestion, she would like to be assured of your agreement. Umar took some time to digest what was being asked of him, but he called out, "By God, Jahan, are you after my downfall? Can you see me commanding the armies of the empire, decapitating people, or quelling a slave revolt? Leave me to my stars." "Listen to me, Umar. I know that you have no desire to conduct affairs of state. Your role will be simply to be there. The decisions will be taken and carried out by others. In other words, you will be the real vizier and your mistress the real sultan. Isn't that what you are after? And how would that upset you? You would have the honors with none of the worries. What better could you wish for?" Tarkan Khatun intervened to qualify her proposal. Jahan translated, "My mistress says it is because men like you turn away from politics that we are so badly governed. She considers you to have all the qualities of an excellent vizier. Tell her that the qualities needed to govern are not those which are needed in order to accede to power. In order to run things smoothly, one must forget oneself and only be interested in others. Particularly the most unfortunate. To get into power, one must be the greediest of men. Think only of oneself and be ready to crush one's closest friends. I, however, will not crush anyone." For the moment, the two women's projects were at a standstill. Umar refused to bend to their demands. Anyway, it would have served no use as the confrontation between Nizam and Hassan had become unavoidable. That same day, the audience hall was a peaceful arena, and the 15 people there were content to watch in silence. Malik Shah himself, usually so exuberant, was conversing in hushed tones with his chamberlain, while idiosyncratically twiddling with the ends of his mustache. From time to time, he shot a glance at the two gladiators. Hassan was standing up, wearing a creased black robe and a black turban, and wearing his beard lower than usual. His face was furrowed, and his searing eyes were ready to meet those of Nizam, although they were red with fatigue and lack of sleep. Behind him, a secretary carried a bundle of papers tied up with a wide band of cordovan. As a privilege that comes with age, the Grand Vizier was seated, or more correctly, slumped in a chair. His robe was gray, his beard flecked with white, and his forehead wizened. Only his glance was young and alert, one might even say sparkling. Two of his sons accompanied him, flashing looks of hatred or defiance. Right next to the Sultan was Umar. As dour as he was overwhelmed, he was drawing up in his mind various conciliatory words which he would doubtless not have occasion to utter. "Today is the day that we are promised a detailed report on the state of our treasury. Is it ready?" said Malik Shah. Hassan leaned over. "My promise has been kept. Here is the report." He turned towards his secretary, who came forward to meet him and carefully untied the leather band holding together the pile of papers. Sabah started to read them out. The first pages were, as custom would have it, expressions of thanks, pious discourses, erudite quotations, and well-turned, eloquent pages, but the audience was waiting for more. Then it came. "I have been able to calculate precisely," he declared, "what the tax office of every province and known town has sent in to the royal treasury. In the same way, I have evaluated the booty won from the enemy, and I now know how this gold has been spent." With great ceremony, he cleared his throat, handed to his secretary the page he had just read, and fixed his eyes on the next one. His lips opened a little and then shut tight. Silence fell again. He threw aside the leaf of paper and then set that one aside with a furious gesture. There was still silence. The Sultan was becoming a little anxious and impatient. "What is going on? We are listening to you." "Master, I cannot find the continuation. I had arranged my papers in order. The sheet I am looking for must have fallen out. I shall find it." He leafed through them again, rather pathetically. Nizam made the most of the situation by intervening in a tone which tried to sound magnanimous. "Anyone can lose a piece of paper. We should not hold that against our young friend. Instead of waiting around, I propose that we go on with the rest of the report." "You are right, Atta. Let us go on with the report." Everyone noticed that the Sultan had called his vizier father anew. Did this mean that he was back in favor? While Hassan was still caught up in the most pathetic state of confusion, the vizier pushed his advantage. "Let us forget this lost page. Instead of making the Sultan wait, I suggest that our brother Hassan presents to us the figures on some important cities or provinces." The Sultan was eager to agree. Nizam carried on. "Let us take the city of Nishapur, for example, the birthplace of Umar Khayyam, who is here with us. Could we be informed how much that city and its province have contributed to the treasury?" "Immediately," responded Hassan, who had been trying to land on his feet. He had plowed expertly through his pile of papers, trying to extract page 34, where he had written everything about Nishapur, but it was in vain. "The page is not there," he said. "It has disappeared. I have been robbed of it. Someone has messed up my papers." Nizam stood up. He went up to the Malik Shah and whispered in his ear, "If our master cannot have confidence in his most competent servants who are aware of the difficulty of projects and can tell the difference between the possible and the impossible, there will be no end to his being thus insulted, held up to ridicule, and fair game for the ignorant, the foolish, and charlatans." Malik Shah did not doubt for a moment that Hassan had just been the victim of some practical joke. As the chroniclers reported, Nazim al-Mulk had succeeded in bribing Hassan's secretary and ordered him to filch some pages and to misfile others, reducing to naught the patient work carried out by his rival. Hassan tried in vain to claim that he was the victim of a plot, but his voice could not be heard over the tumult, and the Sultan, disappointed to have been duped, but even more so to realize that his attempt to shake his vizier's tutelage had failed, directed the whole blame onto Hassan. Having ordered his guards to seize him, he there and then sentenced him to death. For the first time, Umar spoke up. "May our master be merciful. Hassan Sabah may have made mistakes. He may have sinned through an excess of zeal or enthusiasm, and he should be dismissed for these misdemeanors, but he is in no way guilty of a serious misdeed against your person." "Then let him be blinded. Bring the galanite and heat up the iron." Hassan stayed silent, and it was Umar who spoke up again. He could not allow a man whom he had engaged to be silenced or blinded. "Master," he begged, "do not inflict such a punishment on a young man who could only find solace in his disgrace by reading and writing." Malik Shah then stated, "It is for your sake, Khawaja Umar, the wisest and purest of men, that I agree to retract a decision of mine yet again. Hassan Sabah is thus condemned to be banished and will be exiled to a distant country until the end of his time. He will never be able to tread anew upon the soil of the empire. But the man from Qom was to return and carry out an exceptional act of vengeance.